Welcome, Honorable Karim, the Chairperson of the Select Committee. Welcome, members of the Select and the Standing Committee Finance from the NCOP and NA. Let me also welcome the stakeholders in the platform to make to make submissions. Welcome the media, welcome the support teams from Parliament, from both houses, and welcome members of the public if they are in the platform. Today, we are conducting public hearings on the 2022 revised fiscal framework and revenue proposals. Let me also welcome all officials from National Treasury and SARS and other entities if they are in the platform. We haven't received apologies. Are there apologies? Let me not assume that there are apologies. There are no apologies.
No apologies from the Standing Committee on Finance, Chair.
No apologies, Chair, from the Select Committee on Finance as well.
Okay. Let's move to item 2 and take submissions from the stakeholders. Each stakeholder is allocated 15 minutes. Let's start with COSATU. Comrade Matthew, are you there, or who else is from COSATU?
I'm here, Comrade Chairperson. Good morning, Chair members.
Okay, yeah. Well, you are Honorable Comrade Matthew. You know very well how we run the business of this committee. So please time yourself, Comrade Matthew.
Okay. No, thanks, Chairperson. Yeah, I can just run to it. Good morning, Chairperson members, and just thanks for giving us space as COSATU as always to just share our views. Just putting our presentation quickly. So, Chair, I think just to cut straight to it, I mean, the vantage point that we start from as COSATU with regards to the NTBPS is our 44% unemployment rate. It's unsustainable, and yet we do appreciate it's decreased by 2% over the past 2 quarters. But we need to sustain that consistent decrease. But of course, Comrade Chair, it's quite scary that we have an unemployment rate for young people of over 60%. That is a ticking time bomb that will engulf all of us if we don't fix it. We have a stagnant economy. The growth projection rates have been further lowered in the MTBPS. We all know the pain of rising inflation. And of course, it's going with rising levels of poverty and inequality. And I think, Chair, we've all underestimated the impact of the decade of state capture and corruption on the capacity of the state to deliver quality public services that the economy and that workers depend upon. We are worried as COSATU about the rising public debt levels, but equally think it needs to be tempered with the need to rebuild the state. And of course, we need to put everything we can to support ESCOM to end load shedding. We are worried that we're not doing enough to tackle cable theft and the impact it's having upon Transnet and Metrorail and those who depend upon it. And we'd also hope to see in the MTBPS some measures to repivot our SOEs, and of course also to address the rapid rise in distressed municipalities. Chair, in terms of the fiscal framework, we do agree with government that the rapid rise over the past decade in the public debt is an existential threat to our national sovereignty, to our post-1994 gains, and to workers, public and private. We are equally concerned with the below CPI increases to key departments over the MTEF period. And we think it's going to have a real negative impact upon service delivery. We think the Treasury's focus on slashing expenditure to cut debt at the expense of stimulating the economy, of providing relief, of rebuilding quality public services is not going to resolve the fiscal crisis. We think that the MTPS has really failed to tackle the fundamental causes of our fiscal crisis, namely the recession, corruption, limping SOEs, etc. Chair, in fact, we think on the public service wage bill that it's a shortcut. It's a bit of a cheap obsession by government, where in essence we're dumping the bill for corruption, for state capture, for mismanagement of the state and economy upon nurses and teachers, the very people we've been praising for the past 3 years for keeping the nation afloat during COVID. And we think we have to reject that kind of a single-minded approach. There's a real danger that the repeated 0% in 2020 or the below CPI increases for public servants is going to escalate the brain drain from the public sector, so that teachers will go to the private sector, nurses and doctors will go overseas where they get paid far better. We think we need to recognize that public servants, like all other workers, are drowning in debt. And there is a need for the state to rebuild the damage done by the previous Minister of Finance, to respect collective bargaining and to rebuild a sense of trust with organized labor, the PSABC. And we do think it's not unreasonable for police officers, for nurses to want to be protected from inflation. We think there are ways to help government stabilize the fiscal balance sheet. For example, having a single collective bargaining process for the entire state, not just simply the public service, which is about 2/3 of the state. But we also think, Chair, politically, we need to send a message that we're going to cut the fat from politicians, from the senior management. And at times it's quite unbelievable that executives in the Road Traffic Management Corporation, for example, would get paid more than the president of the country. And we're quite worried about the rapid decline in the headcount in the public service. We need to reverse that. There was some mention of that in the MTBPS, but there was no concrete details in that regard. So it's quite worrying. Chair, on the revenue front, we really want to applaud the excellent work being done by SARS and its employees to rebuild SARS and to exceed the revenue targets this year. And the future years has really given us space to begin to rebuild the nation. And I think, Chair, this is evidence of the value of investing in the state and the benefits it brings to the economy and to the public. We think we need to do more to reinforce SARS, give them additional resources to build the capacity to employ additional staff so they can really ramp up their efforts to tackle tax evasion and customs evasion. And they really are doing wonders of work. So it's a useful investment. You give them additional resources, they'll generate manifold revenue increases. We think we need to end the trend of increasing taxes upon working class families. For example, the failure to adjust tax brackets creep for CPI for workers. We do think we need to give additional support to SARS to really ramp up its efforts to tackle tax evasion by the wealthy, and in particular to tackle customs fraud. There's far more work that needs to be done in that regard. We should be seeing what additional taxes could be looked at for the wealthy. But I think for us, the number one issue really is about investing in SARS capacity. Chair, we were quite disappointed that in the MTBPS, we didn't see practical interventions around corruption. We do want to welcome the recent increase over the past few months in arrests of people accused of corruption, the seizing of assets. That's positive. We now need to see that translating into trials and to convictions and to sentencing. But we're quite worried, Chair, when you look at the MTBPS, how far behind the NPA is in terms of meeting its own annual performance targets. It's abysmal the levels it has reached. And there's a real decline in the police headcount over the past decade, from over 200,000 when we had the World Cup to about 172,000 to date. Yes, Governor said that they're going to employ an additional 12,000 police officers this year. That's great, but that's against an annual attrition rate of about 10,000. So that's a meaningless increase. Yet the population and crime is rising. There was a mention of additional funds for law enforcement, but there's no real practical details. We are pleased, Chair, that we've made good progress around the public procurement bill at NEDLAC. We've now concluded the engagements. It should come to Parliament soon. We'd want to see it being expedited, but we think there is a need to further strengthen it in some areas. And we think, Chair, we do need to empower SARS to undertake lifestyle audits of politicians, of senior state officials, and wealthy persons in the private sector, because they are the most capacitated institution to do that. We want to welcome the one-year extension of the SOT grant. It's really provided helpful relief to 10 million people, but we think we need to go further. Let's see if we can increase it to the food poverty line, because we have not adjusted it for inflation in its 3 years of existence, so it is being eroded. We do need to see SARSA addressing and the Treasury addressing the administrative challenges, which have seen a decline from 10 million to 7.5 million recipients. But as a positive thing, Chair, we should be using it as a foundation for a basic income grant, linking it to skills and employment opportunities. But equally, Chair, we also do need to see government moving much greater speed to modernize the UIF and the compensation funds, because they also provide critical support for workers in the economy. We should be looking at is a space for progressive tax regime for SMEs to give support to them. But we're quite worried here that in the MTBPS, there was no mention about the bounce back schemes, low take up. I think to date is about 2% take up. And that's a repeat of what we saw with the loan guarantee scheme. And we don't see much efforts by the banks or by Treasury to resolve that. We are quite pleased with the progress around the revenue amendment bill, providing for pension relief. And we think we need to kind of finalize the amendments to it and expedite its passage into law by I think June next year, so it can come into effect. We would want to see by October next year. On the employment programs, we're quite disappointed that we didn't see a significant increase to the presidential employment stimulus, which has done quite well. We really want to see by February its allocation be increased significantly to accommodate 2 million unemployed young people, because it has really had a positive impact to date. We wish to see, can we expand it across other frontline service departments, entities, SOEs, to help young people get experience, get into the labor market. The private sector also has to come to the party. And, for example, expanding internships. But we also do need to have a discussion about overhauling the various public employment programs to ensure there is really quality training. They're linked to the minimum wage, we support emerging sectors, and so forth. So we don't just become a source of cheap labor for municipalities. We do want to welcome efforts to kind of rebuild ESCOM, to ramp up the maintenance program. The announcement of a commitment to take over up to 2/3 of ESCOM debt is positive. We hope it's at least 200 billion rand to really give ESCOM some breathing space. But Chair, we're quite worried that it might come at the expense of ESCOM having to sell off key assets, which we think is going to weaken ESCOM in the long run. It should be about supporting ESCOM, not about decapacitating it. But Chair, we also need to see government and municipalities paying their debts to ESCOM. It can't be right that they have 51 billion rand of municipal debt to ESCOM, and that forces ESCOM to go for these double-digit electricity tariff hikes, which suffocates the economy. We think we need to be moving towards prepaid meters, all of us. And the NP and the law enforcement agency must also really assist ESCOM to tackle corruption, because to be honest, they have been missing in action, and ESCOM obviously cannot arrest people. We need to see DMRE also addressing the regulatory blockages to getting new generation on board. And it is quite shocking, Chair, that in the DMRE's solar panel programs for RDP houses, year after year, they're very far behind their targets. Chair, I think it is quite positive that government is now concluding the chapter of e-tolls. Let's find a new progressive funding model for roads. We want to support the relief given to Denel, and hope that that includes paying workers the money they're owed for the past 18 months. And there is a turnaround plan which will save jobs, not to send workers to the unemployment queue. The additional relief for transit is positive, but it needs to be accompanied by real security support, including the deployment of police, defense force, a SAPS railway unit, if we're really going to save Transnet. We're quite surprised that there was an absence of any additional support for Metro Rail, which also is in free fall. And even absence of support for the post office, which plans to retrench 6,000 workers over the next 2 years. And where we've seen workers not being paid monies they are owed, including monies that are deducted from their salaries. We hope that we can see from the Presidential SOE Council some new model for SOEs, which includes repivoting them going forward. Chair, on the fuel price regime, the fuel price hikes we're now seeing, including today, are really suffocating the economy. We know there's nothing government can do about the war in Ukraine, but government can address the fuel price taxes. They can address the ESCOM tariff hikes, which I think the debt relief will help. In 2018 and even this year in April, government had made a commitment, the ministers, to review the fuel price regime, yet we've seen nothing since that time. We think there is space to reduce the 32% tax that we charge on the fuel regime. Chair, we also think that the Department of Transport has to be hauled over the coals and instructed to retable the RAF and the RABS bills at Parliament, because those are going to help set the RAF on a sustainable path and reduce its 400 billion rand liabilities and help to lessen the need to increase the fuel levy all the time. And of course, if we want to protect our goods, our food, our commuters from fuel inflation, then we need to fix our railway network. Chair, just moving towards the last few minutes. On the infrastructure program, we thought it's quite a positive program to help rebuild the economy, rebuild public services. The allocations to transit, to water are positive. The increase, to 112 billion is positive of the MTEF, but we're very, very far behind on 1.6 trillion rand targets and timeframes. And we really think we need to see much more interventions to prioritize infrastructure investments in electricity, transmission, distribution, water, roads, rail, and ports, because we just seem to be falling very far behind our tracks. Chair, I think for us as COSATU, investing in industrial capacity of the economy is critical, to creating jobs, to growing key growth sectors. Yet we've seen very little allocations given to DTIC's industrialization export incentive programs. And in fact, we've seen consistently we're giving them below CPI increases. A little support is given to the master plans. And there's a constant undermining by government departments, SOEs, municipalities of government's own localization procurement commitments. Chair, I won't go into the appropriation or the APP issues too much. We can leave that for the appropriation engagements. But I think, Chair, it's quite worrying how so many key departments, basic education, higher education, the NPA, human settlements, DMRE, small business, transport, water, are very, very far behind the annual performance targets. Some of them have only met 10% of the targets, and yet we are halfway through the year, and there's not much that will be done over the Christmas period, if we're honest. We're quite disappointed that no additional funds are given to the CCMA. So, Chair, just concluding, again, similarly with local government and provincial government, you can see they're very far behind in the expenditure in many instances. The most worrying part, Chairperson, is that we've seen the municipalities are in deep trouble. 90% of them are in financial freefall. There's a positive 40 billion rand allocation to give them support, but there's no concrete details about how are you going to turn these municipalities around. We don't see much effort by COGTA or SALGO to hold this alarming rise in municipalities collapsing. And we're seeing a consequence of many workers across many provinces no longer being paid by the municipalities. So we think we need to see a real action by COGTA to arrest this sinking ship. So in conclusion, Chair, I hope I've stuck to the time frame. There are positives in the MTBPS, so we should appreciate and recognize and claim. The SOD grant extension, the ESCOM debt relief, the e-tolls, the transit and Denel allocations, with some question marks, but also quite worried about some of the very worrying parts. The below CPI raises for public services and social grants, the failure to protect public servants from CPI, little about tackling corruption, wasteful expenditure, a lack of additional support for Metro Rail, for the post office, for SABC. We don't have clear plans to stabilize municipalities. We're running away from our commitment to giving some fuel relief to the economy and to commuters, and very little that says how we're going to grow the economy and to support industrialization. We hope, Chair, that in conclusion, that in the February budget, government will table a budget which is very bold, which is progressive, which is going to stimulate the economy, if we expect things to change and to improve. So let me stop there, Chairperson, and hope I stuck to the time frame. So thanks very much for giving us space as COSATU. Thanks, Chairperson.
Thanks, Comrade Matthews, and also for sparing 1 minute. Thanks very much for sticking to the time frame allocated to you. The next one is South African Institute of Chartered Accountant. I hope it's our colleague Sharon.
Yes, morning. How are you?
You know the rules.
I know the rules. I know the rules, and I've got the 15 minutes. So thank you. It's not 10 minutes this time. It's 15. And I just want to say, sorry.
Yes, over to you.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody, honourable chairs and honourable members. This will be the last time I will be presenting in Parliament. I have resigned from SAICA, but I'm leaving you in the capable hands of Lesedi. So hopefully he'll continue fighting the good fight and representing SAICA in Parliament. So I'm going to start today with the overview of the budget, as we usually do, and going into the different specifics of each of the different areas of the budget, but starting off with the FATF grey listing. So the budget this year came with a bit of sunshine behind the clouds. It looked a lot better than was expected with the additional revenue that we got in. However, there are still huge clouds hanging over this particular budget. And the one biggest concern is the FATF grey listing, which was basically mentioned twice, I think, in the budget document, and saying things are being done to try and prevent this. But the question that we've really got to ask ourselves is that there were certain requirements of us, or requirements that we had to fulfill in order to prevent the grey listing. And the first one was the legislative changes, and that's been happening. We've been seeing the legislation coming through thick and fast through Parliament, and that's the easy job, and we're doing quite well on that. So congratulations there. The difficult part, however, is the law enforcement and prosecutions. And our SAICA did mention in our previous submissions that we have a VIP budget that protects a few individuals of about 3.4 billion compared to the NPA budget that is looking at 4.9 billion. And we suggested that we allocated 1.7, half of the budget of the VIP protection unit to law enforcement, where we actually need it to prevent us from being put on the grey list. Because the repercussions of us being put on the grey list, I was chatting yesterday to Peter about this, it is actually quite scary. We have to do everything in our power to stop this grey listing, if that is possible. If we just look at Turkey, for instance, they lost, I think it was 3.1 billion of GDP, or 31 billion of GDP, which is about 400 billion rand. We cannot afford to lose that kind of stuff. Now, we do note in the medium term that additional funding has been provided to certain institutions and departments, etc., to ramp up this law enforcement and prosecutions. But the question is this is only going to be provided, or more details of this are going to be given in the budget next year. And the average grey listing is 5 to 10 years. And the one that got off the list the quickest was Mauritius, which took 2 years. And as I said, the repercussions of us being put on this grey list, our country just cannot afford it. We have to do everything. So we can't quite understand why we have not taken this a little bit more seriously and allocated a lot quicker, allocated money a lot quicker to the law enforcement and prosecution departments. Over the next 3 years, unfortunately, we feel it's just not going to cut it. So is it enough being done? Our feeling is unfortunately not. If it is, and we do prevent the grey listing, we need to find out exactly how we're going to ensure the effective spending with this additional money that is being allocated to all these different departments. But also our concern is, if we still read the media now, there's more and more concerns coming out about the oversight failure of the banks, allowing all this money laundering to take place, and SARB's role in the oversight of these banks is put in question as well, and that does not bode well for us to prevent the grey listing. And again, it hasn't been factored into this, and the possibilities, if we take all the things, and yes, we have certain, things happening, but we don't have proper convictions, as Kasati mentioned. We need trials, we need convictions, and that just unfortunately hasn't been coming through. But I'll touch on this at the end of my presentation again. So if I move on to the revenue now, again, revenue estimates are absolutely critical. And again, in the budget, these revenue estimates are going up, despite the weak economic growth, and the growth is actually being forecast to go down since last year, in fact. And we're looking at an average of 1.6 growth over the medium term. Now, the budget says that this is partially because of permanent increases. We're not too sure about that. Obviously, it was a lot of the commodity prices. There was a boom there again. Those are definitely not long term. And even the commissioner has said that these are steep estimates that are being set, and targets that have been set for him and his team. And the budget speech itself, or the budget documentation, said that there is significant uncertainty with these projections. Now, what is the problem if there is uncertainty with these projections is that the expenditure is basically matched to this revenue. We spend as much as we can get in. And if we're not getting in enough, we are still carrying on the spending side. And that's the problem. The spending continues, but the revenue might not come in. And that then again puts us in a debt position. We have to borrow and incur more costs. If we look at the estimates of the tax to GDP ratio, as we mentioned in our previous budget speech, again, that is growing, and we're now hitting or going above the 25% limit that the CATS report said we should stick to. The Joint Standing Committees of Finance also in the past have recommended that 25% may be a limit to stick to, but they were going to do more research. We'd like to get an update to see whether or not that research was done, to investigate whether or not, breaching this 25 limit has severe consequences, and they could have potential detrimental consequences to our economy if we're taxing too much, but the growth is not there. So we need to factor these things into account. We don't see them coming in, and we'd like to get an update, as I said, on if the potential research was done. On the funding for SARS, we congratulate, again, the allocation of further funds in the medium term to SARS, who needs 9 billion rand to fund them in the next 3 years. As we saw, SARS, to appease their workers, had to provide additional salary increases, which were not budgeted for. They used the budgeted of the additional appointments that they didn't fill, their vacancy rates, to provide for this funding. So our question is the additional funding actually going to be enough for them to fulfill on their mandate, their steep mandate, to collect all the additional revenue if they now do not have the additional personnel that they were hoping to get? On the GRAP side, again, like we said, it's 15 years on. We know they have extension until 2026, but what is taking so long? And does Parliament know how far they are on the process? And are they going to be pushing this out till 2026? It is really problematic. From a governance perspective, we'd like to know when the budget speech was silent on when the public consultation document will be issued by Treasury. So we're looking forward to more updates on when that will actually be released. Then we get onto the expenditure side, which for me is really, really critical, because this is where we are really falling short. And I'm going to start off today with the expenditure ceilings. As we mentioned before, these are rapidly increasing. They increase year on year. As you can see, they've increased again. And the concern here is that these aren't even the actual ceilings, because what has not been factored into these ceilings is the Eskom debt that has to be taken over. That said, it will be taken over. We're looking at about 200 billion rand in that regard, as well as the wage increases for 2023 that also have not yet been factored into the budget. And if we work on a 7% increase, that will amount to about 31 billion rand that has not been included in these ceilings. And really breaching these ceilings consistently, as was noted by the rating agencies as well, is really putting the credibility of our budget into question. So why are these things, why are we keep breaching these limits? National Treasury has admitted that, they are looking at alternative approaches to try and keep to these ceilings or get different ceilings, etc. So we look forward to an update on them, and we would suggest Parliament request regular feedback on this, because we cannot keep breaking these ceilings. On the contingency and unallocated reserves, as we said, they are increasing. We know a portion of it is for the land bank. Some of the figures don't tie up with the words in the budget speech, so I think Treasury needs to have a look at that. But again, our feeling is we're putting almost 80 or more than 80 billion rand into the unallocated reserve instead of actually, and it seems to be allocated for things that we know about rather than the unknown. And we question whether or not this is basically, Parliament is approving this, but then do they get the opportunity to see how that money is actually allocated afterwards? It's a question that we just have. On the public sector wage bill, as we can see, it is substantially higher than our peer countries. It's the highest in the emerging markets. It's not because of an increase in headcount, as Kusada said, that's been going down. It's because of the above inflationary increases. Biggest problem, though, no buffer has been provided for the wage increases in 2023-2024, and they are anticipating a 3.1% increase in the medium term. If we look, I heard today on the radio that I think it's 2 or 4 other unions have got the right to strike. So it's not realistic as far as we are concerned. And again, we do recognize what National Treasury is trying to do by moving to a single remuneration framework, and we really are thrilled about Cabinet's approval of the framework for professionalising the public sector, so well done on that. But until we address the structural mix, getting the right people on the ground that need to do the work, not management, and linking the remuneration to actual performance, none of this is going to help. On the state-owned entities, as you can see, we welcome the framework, 30 billion rand allocated to those 3, and the enforcement of minimum criteria for state guarantees, but we have the old guarantees that are the problem. So what wasn't mentioned in the budget is all the other SOEs. For instance, we know the land bank is there, but what about SAA? What's happening with that post office, SABC? The biggest concern, though, is the road accident fund that has a debt book of 479 billion rand, which is more than the Eskom book. Nothing about that was mentioned in this medium-term budget. In 2024-25, we're looking at contingent liabilities of 1 trillion rand. So what we really need, and we urge Parliament to ask National Treasury to prepare a risk-based schedule, putting out a reasonable estimate of what are our actual risks. We know Eskom has now come to the light. We're now going to be taking that up. What other ones? Road accident fund. What is the potential of that going forward? And we obviously need to improve the public-private partnership so that we can actually get the service delivery in the meantime. Kusata mentioned the municipalities' dire straits here. We welcome the early warning system to improve oversight, but unfortunately, that is not enough until we have stop allocations to ones that are not performing and have disciplinary actions against the accounting officers where they are not keeping to the budgets. None of this is going to assist either. Infrastructure, again, we're happy that we are spending on that, but we are concerned that a lot of this is not new infrastructure, it's rehabilitation or repairs and maintenance. And we suggest that National Treasury put through a schedule that actually shows what the true investment is by splitting it into the 3 categories that I mentioned over there: repairs and maintenance, rehabilitation, and then actual new infrastructure, so that we know what we are spending on new buildings and infrastructure, etc. Debt increasing, as we said, as we all know. Problem is foreign debt is increasing also, which gives us a currency exposure. But of concern is our cash reserves. They are decreasing rapidly. And if we need sufficient cash urgently, will we have access to that? So we suggest that Parliament asks National Treasury to explain their cash flow management plans, considering that our cash reserves are depleting at a rapid pace. Obviously, as debt goes up, so do the service costs. These continue to rise, and it will be even more than actually anticipated in the budget, because it hasn't factored in the Eskom debt, and it hasn't factored in the possible grey listing either. So the only way we're going to reduce our debt is if we reduce expenditure. Unfortunately, we can't reduce it if there are still some unbudgeted expenditures in the budget. We haven't taken certain things to account. Scary is the medical legal claims that are sitting on 109 billion rand. So what is Parliament doing, and what is happening with these sort of things to prevent this from continuing, and what's been done in the last 6 months since we highlighted these particular unbudgeted expenditure concerns? And I'm going to end off with the implementation accountability, which I spent some time on in the 2022 budget in February. But we know who's responsible for what. It's clear in the legislation. I go back to FATF grey listing because that is the biggest, darkest cloud hanging over this particular budget, because we should have been doing something about this a lot earlier. So how did this all come about? Well, South Africa joined FATF in 2003. Parliament knew about that. South Africa received its first negative review in 2009. We took 8 years to fix what they suggested we fix. Parliament was aware of that. And FATF started their current evaluation in October 2009 and reported on this in October 2021. Now, Parliament should have known about this as well. And that brings me to my conclusion here, is that, as we suggested in our February budget, is we need a collective 360-degree oversight between all the committees of Parliament, because ultimately it's Parliament that has this responsibility. And if one committee might know about it and it affects another committee, but they're not aware about it, we have the problem. And that's the problem that we're sitting with now at the moment with the FATF grey listing scenario. So again, we need this collective oversight. We need to know what happened in the past, what's going to happen in the future, and what's happening now. And based on that, we can make decisions going forward. On the implementation side, as I said before, revenue is not our problem, expenditure is. We need to hold the ministers accountable. They had their performance contracts. What's happened about that? Well, there's no feedback on that. We need the rapid implementation of this framework for professionalizing the public sector. And most importantly, we need a productivity pact, because at the moment, we are blankly awarding everyone the same amount. And there is no budget left for performers. And this is not only demotivating. So those are actually working are going to just give up. Those not working are just going to carry and still get paid. And so they carry on. But in the meantime, it's the taxpayers and the people of our country that are suffering. So yeah, I think that's it from me. Thank you very much. Appreciate your time.
Thanks very much, Sharon. And also, would like to bid you farewell, as you said that this is the last time that you appear before this committee, and wish you all the best in your new responsibility.
Thank you. Really appreciate it. Thank you, Chair.
Yes, we benefited a lot throughout these years from your invaluable contribution.
Thank
I
you.
hope I also represent my colleague, Comrade Eunice. Comrade Eunice, our colleague Sharon is bidding us farewell here. Do you want to say something?
Silence is golden.
We'll come back. Just stay on the line.
Fine.
Okay.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks very much, sure.
He has dodged the meeting and left the jacket.
I will look for him. I'm a former teacher. I know how to. Okay, let's move to the Institute for Economic Justice. Who's presenting?
Good morning, Chair. It's Sherilyn Salmon. I am presenting for the first time. Thank you for the opportunity.
You are welcome. We are bidding farewell to Sharon, and we are welcoming you, Sharon, from the Institute for Economic Justice.
I appreciate it. Chair, members, thank you for the opportunity to make a presentation this morning. We really appreciate it. I am trying to, there we go, change slides. So this morning we want to outline the following: the need to rethink the fiscal framework, austerity at the expense of public services, the impact that the choices in the MTBPS are having on disinvestment from key public services, key priorities that have not been included in the MTBPS, revenue proposals for the 2023 budget, and we will table some recommendations. We need to rethink the fiscal framework, Chair. In our pre-budget submission to the MTEF, the IEJ called for Treasury to rethink its extreme approach to fiscal consolidation and debt stabilization. In that submission, we proposed that Treasury reverse austerity measures, that they abandon a narrow fiscal policy framework aimed at debt stabilization through austerity, that they adopt a macroeconomic policy framework that explicitly aims to reduce unemployment, poverty, and inequality or triple crisis, and that they increase investment and consumption expenditure, including investing in labor-intensive sectors, the public services, social infrastructure, as well as expand social security and public sector employment. We further recommended that they ensure fiscal and sectoral policies are aligned, including through strong resourcing and industrial policies, for example, the current master plans. Despite our proposals, we saw that in the MTBPS, there was continued fiscal consolidation, and it highlights the distance between the reality of South Africans and the priorities of the state. We feel that there can be no dignity and improvement in the standard of living without access to quality public services and social security. This is crucial, particularly for indigent households. Over the years, we witnessed declining real government expenditure on basic education, on healthcare, on social protection, and the midterm estimates predict a similar decline. We'll show you some expenditure trends in the next slide. So here, what we've done is we've plotted nominal expenditure versus real expenditure. And so the dotted lines are nominal growth, and then the solid lines are real growth. And you'll see the green lines represent basic education. So real growth is on a slow decline, but this doesn't account for the change in the numbers of learners, so the actual users of the system. This is just nominal versus real. The orange lines account for healthcare expenditure, which seems flat, but it is actually mildly negative. And the blue lines account for social protection, which clearly carries a negative trend. In terms of basic education, when we zoom in on this, what we see is the right to basic education continues to regress under austerity. The decline in real expenditure in education is very concerning. What we see is that in real terms, average annual growth remains almost stagnant at just 0.3 over the medium term. But when growth in learners is taken into account, expenditure falls each year from 20,156 Rand a learner to 19,478 Rand a learner. So that fall in the budget per learner, combined with vacant teacher posts, combined with overcrowded classrooms, and the commoditization of education through private schools means that the existing gap in the quality of education will just continue to grow over the medium term. When we zoom in on healthcare, a larger number of South Africans continue to suffer from poor healthcare services. So access to quality healthcare services do not only guarantee well-being, but also provide the community with a healthy workforce. And yet we see that Treasury has decided that real healthcare expenditure should decline from 246.3 billion in 2021-2022 to 242.2 billion in 2022-2023, so that there's an average of -2% over the medium term. When population growth is taken into account, the associated increase in the number of healthcare users and declining expenditure on health means real expenditure per capita drops from 5,080 Rand, just over that, in the current year to 4,945 Rand in 2023-2024 per user. The midterm estimates predict expenditure to only be restored to current levels in 2024-2025. So some of this drop may be attributed to compensating for expenditure during the COVID period. However, we still see that healthcare services are in a poor state, and so declining expenditure in healthcare is really quite worrying, and certainly the delay in return to these levels of expenditure in 2024, 2025. When we look at social security, we see that the minister acknowledged the importance of both employment and the SRD grant for household consumption and the rising cost of living. Yet the SRD grant and other social grants receive no adjustment in line with inflation. The value of the child support grant is substantially below the food poverty line. This is particularly worrying. In addition, if the SRD grant had kept up with inflation, it would now have been around 410 Rand at this point. It's also concerning that government has pitted the SRD as a trade-off against other social grants. There can be no trade-offs in the protection of human dignity and social economic rights enshrined in the Constitution. It's crucial that this becomes a priority that's realized in the numbers in the budget. No grant should be below the food poverty line. Continuing with social security concerns, we welcome the extension of the SRD grant to March 2024. However, it's disappointing that the SRD has not increased to the food poverty line as civil society has been advocating, and nor has it been adjusted for inflation. And so the basket that's available to recipients of the SRD grant is eroding. There's still no clear pathway on how permanent social support will be introduced following the termination of the SRD grant in March 2024. And in the latest NTBPS, the DSD accounts for 1.77 billion of the 2 billion declared unspent so far, which is said to be due to the low uptake of the SRD grant. However, the low uptake is a consequence of National Treasury's imposing stringent criteria through the original budget cap of 44 billion. So we see that only 7.4 million people are now receiving the grant, which leaves 3.5 million people who previously accessed this lifeline excluded from receipt of that grant. And then turning to key priorities that weren't included in the MTBPS, we saw a marked absence of climate change plans. And given the impact of the climate crisis today, vague promises of future action are worrisome. Chair, this is a long-term crisis that the country faces, and to not see it addressed in the MTBPS is very concerning. In terms of gender-responsive budgeting, despite vague details of the GRBF in the February 2022 budget, there was no mention at all of GRBF in the MTBPS, and we would welcome seeing that in 2023. In terms of industrial policy, there's no significant provision made for industrialization programs and supporting industrial policy, and in particular, the progressing of the master plans processes. In terms of Eskom, we certainly welcome the state taking on some of Eskom's debt. However, what is concerning is the manner in which Treasury appears to be utilizing this debt restructuring to ensure that Eskom follows a path of unbundling and that private sector participation in the energy system is rapidly expanded, with the minister noting that the funding is conditional on strict conditions. We look forward to seeing the details of that plan. In terms of revenue proposals for the 2023 budget, in our pre-budget submission, we showed that South African corporate income tax rates have fallen from 50% in 1990 to 27% in 2022. And this has had an impact markedly on the tax revenue that government raises and can therefore spend on public services. The MTBPS states that tax revenue is expected to be 83 billion Rand higher in 2022-2023. This is largely driven by corporate income tax, mainly due to the commodities boom. This windfall will be used to reduce budget deficits instead of investing in public services and social security, and we think that there's room for improvement there. More revenue could have been raised if the corporate income tax had not been cut from 28 to 27%. And it's concerning that the MTBPS states that there is no provision for new revenue measures in the 2023-2024 budget. In the 23 budget, Treasury should consider progressive taxation as a means to raise revenue for developmental goals. And some of the ways that this could be done is by reversing corporate income tax. So that would enable the state to raise more revenue and alleviate inequality if we get back to the 28% mark. We propose that a wealth tax be instituted. A wealth tax on the richest South Africans could raise at least another 143 billion rand. We propose a luxury tax, implementing a luxury VAT at a rate of 25% could raise an average of 9 billion rand annually. A social security tax could ring-fence revenue from income that would fund a universal basic income grant. These are crucial measures to look at. The social security tax should progressively be levied upon all income earners, ranging between 1.5% and 3% of taxable personal income. And in this proposal, those who earned less would be the net beneficiaries, and those who earn more would be the net contributors. Further, a resource rent tax. So implementing a resource rent tax would allow for an expansion of the tax base, as this would be a very progressive measure, and it would raise additional and permanent revenue. An end to rebates for corporates and the wealthy. So various tax rebates to corporate and wealthy individuals we feel should be removed. The IEJ has shown that eliminating medical tax credits for those earning above 500,000 Rand could raise 5.7 billion. Similarly, an end in retirement fund contribution deductions for those earning above R1 million could raise an additional 28 billion. These revenues and reduction in wasteful and irregular expenditure could create more fiscal space, which would facilitate the realization of human rights. And so in closing, the IEJ recommends that we use the revenue overrun to support the expansion and improvement of the SRD and of public services, that would provide clear pathways to transition the SRD into a universal basic income guarantee, that we ensure, Chair, at the very least, that public services keep up with population growth and with inflation, and that we don't hollow out the value of that support. We propose that we announce measures to implement progressive taxation to raise sustainable revenue, and that we protect vulnerable households by protecting the value of social grants from being hollowed out by inflation. We propose that there's resolution to the Eskom debt crisis through mechanisms that don't entrench privatization, which would ultimately push up the price of electricity. And we recommend that Treasury ensures the implementation of an intersectoral gender responsive budgeting framework, that this becomes implemented and clear in the 2023 budget, and that there's urgent investment in climate resilient economic and social infrastructure. That is it from me, Chair. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Sherilyn, and also for sticking to the time allocated. Actually, you spared almost 2 minutes of the time allocated to you. Thanks very much. Let's move to public economy project. Over to you, public economy project.
Good day, sir. Can you hear me?
Yes, can hear you and we can see us.
Good morning, chairpersons and honorable members. I'm Rashad Amra, formerly with the Parliamentary Budget Office and now with the Public Economy Project based at Wits Southern Center for Inequality Studies. We'd like to thank the chairpersons and the committees for this opportunity to present. And we work at the Public Economy Project on public finance, on the public economy, and part of our work is to support deliberation on the public economy, on public finances with government, social partners, and civil society. And today's presentation is in that line. So thank you for the opportunity. I will stick to time. Honorable members, we had the MTBPS last week, and we, in response to that, submitted to you a presentation of 24 slides. We're not going to go through the entire presentation. What we are going to do is talk you through our key findings in the light of the purpose of medium-term budget policy planning. And in that respect, we'll go through our key findings and we can deliberate further. And for members further reading and for the technical components, you can refer to our presentation we circulated to the members. So the MTBPS presented a significantly improved outlook for public finances. And this has come on the back of higher commodity prices, a weaker rand, but higher dollar prices for our key commodity exports, as well as higher GDP inflation. And so while the picture looks a lot better than what was presented in the budget at the beginning of this year, I think it's important for us to stress and to emphasize and to caution that these gains are short-term. These gains are not likely to stay with us for the rest of the MTEF. And in fact, based on what we've seen, based on our estimates of a continued anemic performance of the economy, the country is going to remain in a strained fiscal environment, at least for the MTEF and beyond. Honourable members, the MTBPS notes quite emphatically towards the beginning of the document that given this revised trajectory presented in the MTBPS, fiscal consolidation is going to come to a close. Based on our analysis, based on that, we don't see any close of fiscal consolidation in the MTEF. And we have reasons to be concerned about this going forward, and we'll come to that in a moment. So fiscal consolidation continues for the entire 3 years of the MTEF, and this is clearly indicated by falling spending on per capita terms on core spending. In fact, next year, for the 2023-24 financial year, what's penciled in the MTBPS is a significant decline in real spending on a capita basis on core spending. And this is even larger if we go back to our history of public finance in this country. This is even larger than what took place during 97-98 following the introduction of that period of massive fiscal consolidation in the first couple of years of democracy. So despite the very strong narrative of a potential end to fiscal consolidation, what is penciled in, or what is in the MTBPS for the first year, is a significant further deterioration in public spending to achieve fiscal consolidation. The Public Economy Project has on several occasions noted the harmful effects of falling headcounts for core public services. And if members refer to our most recent report, you can see that at a per sector level, some of our analysis. Based on the 22 MTBPS, this trend seems quite likely to continue. The reduction in actual headcount, and specifically for health, education, and criminal justice, headcounts will be forced down, unless, of course, there are real reductions in pay executed for a further 3 years. And we have noted, and other presenters have noted, the impact of this, or alternately, and not particularly likely, if the spending is increased substantially, which would be inconsistent with the current fiscal objective of consolidation currently projected over the medium term. So when we think about the MTBPS overall, one of the key objectives of medium-term fiscal planning is to provide forward guidance to government and to the country about government or cabinet in specifics real spending intentions for the years ahead. This is quite important for effective planning and operations across the country. And so what is presented in the medium-term budget policy statement needs to be the most credible possible outcome, right? So given the inputs that go in and the economic context the country finds itself in, and given and noting that certain factors are exogenous to government, so global growth, commodity prices are not really within not at all within the grasp of government, but expenditure planning is. And so what is presented needs to consider this and needs to be credible for it to actually serve its purpose. And here, as the Public Economy Project, we have some concerns about this being credible, right? If it's not, then it has major implications for government departments going forward to actually respond to the changing socioeconomic dynamics and pressures facing different sectors of the public sector. The MTBPS in this respect presents a debt stabilization trajectory, stabilizing over the MTF, with the primary surplus realized next year. So those numbers look particularly good compared to what was presented in the budget earlier this year. And furthermore, the MTBPS suggests on several occasions that fiscal consolidation has achieved its objective. For several reasons, we as the Public Economy Project are questioning the credibility of this outlook and of these claims in particular. And by extension, we then ask questions about the credibility of fiscal institutions or the institutional arrangements that we have in this country. And so unpacking why we come to that conclusion and raise these questions is simply the spending trajectory is implausible. And this is because the medium-term expenditure framework is silent on several material expenditure pressures. Firstly, the future of the SRD grant. Now, whilst government has made an allocation and extended the SRD grant to the end of the financial year 23-24, what seems to have been the case is they've penciled in an extension of SRD or some alternate form through what's called an unallocated reserve for year 2 and year 3 of the MTEF. Now, this speaks to a deterioration in the management of public finances. If we can't commit to something, we don't really know if it's going to take place in the medium term. And so your expenditure framework is not specifically or particularly credible. Secondly, and as other presenters have noted, the future of wage talks and employee remuneration in the budget is not a particularly credible estimate. And this could really alter the medium-term expenditure framework over the medium term. Thirdly, the future of public employment programs. We've noted estimates from the presidency of what this would cost over the medium term. There hasn't been any forward guidance on whether this is going to be included. And this could be as much as 50 billion, or at least 50 billion over the MTEF. And this is the more conservative estimate from the presidency. Further, it's important to note, and this affects both non-interest spending as well as interest spending, is how and when and in what quantum Eskom's debt is assumed by government, and the implications this then has for financial support to Eskom, which has previously been penciled in over a long term, and how this is then affected. Secondly, some of our concerns regarding the credibility of this fiscal framework stem from revenue projections. They seem to us a bit on the optimistic side, and we would caution against government doing what was done in the 2000s as well, regarding cyclical factors, namely the boon from higher commodity prices and a stronger dollar, and the associated spillover effects as affecting trend estimates of revenue growth. So a step change, an increase in a permanent increase in revenue over the medium term. And this could really alter the fiscal framework over the medium term. What we as the Public Economy Project do is we use slightly different assumptions, slightly different assumptions on expenditure and on revenue, and some other macro assumptions as well, which we consider more plausible than what has been presented in the MTBPS. And what we find is that the fiscal targets set out in the MTBPS are not achieved. So I will take you through our outcomes. So what we have over here is using our assumptions on expenditure and revenue. We find a deviation from what has been presented in the MTBPS, which we consider a more plausible outcome. And the impact of that is we don't realize a primary balance next year as large as what has been presented in the MTBPS. It's only manifests itself at a modest level in the second year of the MTF and significantly lower than what government has projected in the third year of the MTF. We detail all our assumptions in the presentation, and what this suggests is there's a lack of reliability in key budget metrics, and this presents or points to a deterioration in the quality of medium-term policy planning and raises questions about the strength of fiscal institutions going forward. With that, we will also present our projections of debt to GDP over the medium term. And in contrast to what is presented in the MTBPS, the debt to GDP outlook is worsened, right? And this, we believe, is based on more plausible inputs over the MTF, and there's no stabilization over the medium term in contrast to what is presented by the National Treasury. With that, honorable members, we would like to draw to a conclusion, again, noting that when we approach this question of or analysis of the medium-term budget policy statement, it is intended by design to provide forward guidance, the most credible outlook for planning, both policy planning informed by fiscal planning, and we have several reservations about whether it achieves this objective. And this also points to an overall deterioration of budget policy making and the institutional arrangement we have in this country. And we believe this needs to be taken forward into a broader conversation about budget making and about the institutional arrangement we have in this country. On that, we'd like to thank you for your time, and we've provided more details in our circulated presentation. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Rashad, Public Economy Project, for the presentation, and also sticking to time. And actually, have spared 4 minutes of the time allocated to you. Thanks very much. Let's move to the next presentation from Budget Justice Coalition. Who's in the platform from Budget Economy? Budget Justice Coalition, yes.
Thanks, Chair. Elroy and myself, Zimbali, we will present. Elroy will share the slide.
Oh, okay. Oh, well.
Good morning, honorable members of both NCOP and National Assembly. My name is Elroy Paulus, and my colleague Zimbali Ncube have been asked to present on behalf of the Budget Justice Coalition. For those of you who are unfamiliar, the Budget Justice Coalition is a group of 22 organizations and growing. Sorry, Chair, I'm having some problems with my screen. If you could just give me one moment. And those 220 organizations include the organizations that Zimbali and I work for. It includes the Institute of Economic Justice, and I work for the Alternative Information and Development Center. So by way of introduction, and we will share the presentation when I get it up. Can you see the slide now, comrades? Honorable members?
We can't see it. We only see you, Elroy.
Okay. Sorry, Honorable Chairperson. I'll be with you right now.
Did you share the slide with the presentation with Alan?
No, we didn't. We thought we should share it from here, but we can do that as you at your request. Can you see a slide now?
We don't.
Okay, I'm sorry. One moment.
You can share it with Alan.
Okay. May I ask my colleague Zimbali to share it with Alan, please? Murphy's Law.
Okay.
Okay,
There
you got it?
Yes, you can proceed.
Thank you. Apologies for that, honorable chairpersons and members of the committee. So you will see that the organizations are 22 in number and growing. And those organizations specialize and advocate in unique Section 27 rights, social and economic justice issues. And we say that because our inputs are in that sense deeply contextual, based on experience and evidence. If I could move to the next slide. In a nutshell, we in this presentation outline the fact that the prioritization of debt at the expense of public services is a big mistake, and the lack of evidence for the continued aim for a budget surplus is deeply problematic. Therefore, the continuation of an unsustainable fiscal consolidation path in that regard remains extremely worrisome and is not sustainable. We also believe, and you'll see in the presentation outline, that state obligations and the human rights framework will be discussed, and then we make some recommendations. Honorable Chair, we are splitting this 14 slide presentation, and it will be completed in the 15 minutes allocated, but you will have two presenters, myself and Zimbali. He's going to take over from slide 5. So we've said that we're disappointed in the tabling of another MTBPS budget policy statement that prioritizes debt reduction over investments in state capacity and human rights. We believe that the 1.7% real cut in per capita non-expenditure in the current financial year is already doing great harm to public services, and that it is essential for the protection and achievement of human rights and a just transition. And that's not happening for the reasons described. The primary budget surplus of 0.7% of the GDP that government is so persistently aiming to achieve in 2023-4, in our view, is a self-imposed austerity measure of the harshest kind that will inflict further damage onto public services already buckling under the weight of state capture, a decade of austerity, and the COVID-19 pandemic. We believe that the achievement of such a budget surplus, where the revenue exceeds non-interest expenditure and the difference is used to reduce public debt only, almost exclusively, and at the cost of the realization of Section 27 rights, is linked by the IMF itself with rising inequality and worsening public services, while evidence abounds of the impacts of such austerity measures on people on low incomes, and in particular, women and children. So Parliament should not endorse the goal of a primary budget surplus. That is our call. By taking revenue out of the economy and channeling it to debt repayments, the primary budget surplus target will slow down our recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic even further, and will not enable households to, quote, weather the storms that lie ahead, by Treasury's definition. We challenge the Treasury to produce one piece of evidence that a primary budget surplus will lead to greater poverty reduction, a narrowing of inequalities, or a substantial increase in employment. Chair, I hand over to my colleague, Zimbali Ngube.
Thank you so much, Eroy, for getting us started. I'm quite sure, Chair, you'll agree that none of the information we are presenting today is new. Over the years, our colleagues from BJC, along with other civil society organizations, and even in some of these presentations we've seen today, they've shown that there is no end in austerity measures, despite some of the rhetoric that has been shared by the current Minister of Finance. We still continue to see that basic education, healthcare in the MTPP to fail to increase in line with inflation, but also in the demand that is required to fill in the gap for these services. And in the past, the Parliament has approved successive budget, which has reduced spending on some of these core services that I've mentioned. In particular, I would like to draw your attention on basic education, which has the public economy project has shown in some of the work they've done that it has declined from 20,000 in 2009 to 16,500 in 2021. And we believe that the MTPP has still entrenches further cuts in the medium term, and this is worrying for the provision of and protecting of socio-economic rights. We see that the MTPP, the 2022 MTPPS proposes cuts to the public healthcare spending of 7% per healthcare user on average for the next 3 years, and this is worrying and like I said, speaks to the priorities that the minister has despite some of the rhetoric we've heard. I'm just trying to move on to the next slide. Okay. And so this is a trajectory that was announced initially by Minister Titom, the former Minister Titom Mboweni, where we saw child support grants, the pension grant, disability grant, and the SRD continue to be hollowed out by inflation. And in the context of the rising cost of living and high inflation, it's quite unacceptable that some of these social grants continue to receive bill increases. And as some of the colleagues have already indicated, the Treasury has argued that the extension of the SRD grant will come at the expense of these existing social grants. And that is quite worrying because it pits social priorities against each other. And in the face of the commodities boom and improved revenue, we believe that all these social grants should be above the food poverty line. And we see that some of these actions that the Treasury has taken, Chair, is not in par with what other governments across the world have done to protect people from the rising cost of energy, food prices, and other basic necessities. And so the proposed grants, the proposed cuts to grants will reduce the incomes of the poorest households, and this will condemn them to hunger and energy poverty. And as indicated by Errol, Chair, some of the international agencies, including the IMF, the UN, and ILO, have called for an end to the premature aim for a primary budget surplus. In fact, the UN and ILO have gone beyond, and this is indicated by also the PBO, to say that expansionary fiscal policies are key to building resilience for future risks. And so the question that we are posing to Parliament and the role of Parliament is, why has it endorsed this successive budget, which clearly will lead to a regression in human rights? We want to know what political vision do these cuts represent, other than simply showing that the state is walking away from hard-won socioeconomic rights, which are enshrined in our constitutions. As Elroy has indicated, the state has not provided any evidence and any developmental benefits that will be gained from these cuts. And so the question we ask is, what are the development benefits that have been gained in the attack on public services, healthcare services, and other social priorities? And the last key question is, when will Parliament stand up and demand an end to austerity? The Parliamentary Budget Office has shown that in the past 10 years, this austerity budgeting has led to another lost decade, akin to the one that we saw in the 1980s. And this has led to, as Sherlyn has mentioned in her presentations, decreased levels of investment, increased unemployment, and low growth to the GDP. And so collectively, these outcomes will further put a strain on some of the intended outcomes of this chase of a primary budget surplus, which is low levels of debt. So it's in effect, austerity is counterintuitive and self-defeating. Chair, I won't go deep into this slide in particular because it was mentioned by one of the speakers, but it's quite worrying that gender responsive budgeting has not received any mention in this MTBPS. We believe that gender equality should be at the core of the fiscal policies aims and some of the budgetary policies. And we note that the president announced that there was a gender responsive budgeting, planning and a monitoring and evaluation framework, and that the phases will be rolled out in the medium term. However, we're still seeing that there is a lack of an acknowledgement of how this fiscal policy, regressive fiscal policy, has an impact on women, children, people who are vulnerable to the shocks that the economy imposes. And so, Chair, we want to bring to the attention of the Parliament and also Treasury and everyone in this room how the fiscal policy is having an impact on human rights, right? And we believe that budgeting and budgeting processes should directly center the protection of human rights. And human rights violations arise directly from some of the budget decisions that are being made. Some of them not even in consultation with civil society or the general public, which is impacted highly by these decisions. And we argue that a different approach should be taken. And this approach is an approach that ensures that fiscal support is geared towards public services and allocating and improved allocations rather to the core public services that will protect human rights. Comrade Chair, in these circumstances, the government of South Africa can honor its human rights obligations by undertaking participatory human rights impact assessments on its fiscal and budgetary decisions. And this would be in using some of the South African methodologies for evaluating human rights impacts. These would assess where the relevant budgetary decisions were designed to be temporary, meaning that they will stay in place for only as long as they are absolutely necessary, and where they are reasonable, meaning that they are the most effective way of achieving the government's larger aims, and when they are necessary. And this means that with alternative financing measures, including income, wealth, corporate taxes, and some of the proposed revenue measures that my colleague Sherlyn has mentioned. And lastly, where they are proportionate, right? In that their human rights benefit outweigh some of the costs that we see. Currently, the fiscal trajectory and the short-term goal towards a primary budget surplus is not outweighed by some of the costs that it's inflicting on the majority in South Africa. And then another key point to emphasize is that fiscal policy and budgetary decisions should not be directly or indirectly discriminatory. And this applies not only to the budget cuts, but to fiscal consolidation as a whole, which we believe should be on a fair sharing of burdens between social groups such as the rich and the poor, the old and the young, women and men, and present and future generations. And more importantly, Chair, these decisions need to be implemented in a transparent manner that ensures that after the assessments are completed, their potential impact is based on meaningful participation of the affected group, and it's subject to meaningful review and accountability procedures. Currently, the Treasury Chair has shuttered off any alternative proposals which have been presented by civil society, researchers, and academics. And it's undemocratic and not fair that only one department has so much power over the lives and policy decisions of the country, and it's against some of these constitutional measures which we've outlined in this presentation. I'll hand over to my colleague Elroy to close the session. Thanks.
Thank you, Comrade Zimbale, and thank you, Honorable Chairpersons, for allowing us to again make the following inputs, those that have been made, and now the recommendations based on what we've said. So we recommend, Honorable Chairpersons and members, that we abandon the primary budget surplus and instead ensure that public services and households are protected from inflation and by receiving allocations that at least keep up with inflation and user demand. We recognize the value that the public sector workers contribute to the economy and society by ensuring that wages keep up with inflation and vacancies in public health and education, in particular, are filled. We also ask and recommend that the implementation of progressive tax reform targeting high net wealth and medium high income earners to ensure fiscal sustainability, narrow inequality, and then raise additional long-term revenue for a universal basic income grant and other socioeconomic priorities. Instead, we are seeing the reverse with illicit financial flows and base erosion, profit shifting happening. Can I have the next slide, please? Trying to get it. I'm now talking to slide 13. Yeah. The National Treasury must commit to a gender budgeting process that encapsulates budget allocations, taxes and revenue and debt management, and in which women with diverse perspectives and with lived experiences of different contexts are centered in the process of developing goals and debating priorities. Parliament should require that all budget decisions are informed by human rights obligations, and when budget cuts are proposed, that a participatory human rights impact assessment is undertaken first and that these findings are published. In particular, international law requires the country to undertake child impact assessments prior to making any decision that risk erosion of programs and services for children occur. Next slide, please. That is our presentation, Honorable Chairpersons and members. We thank you.
Thank you, Elroy and Zimbale from Budget Justice Coalition for your presentation. The last presentation will come from Healthy Living Alliance. Over to you.
Good evening, Honorable Chair and Honorable members. I'm just trying to share my screen quickly. Please let me know once you can see it. Okay, I think you should be able to see it now, if I'm correct.
Yes.
Okay, thank you so much. So my name is Eunice Monso. I'm representing the Healthy Living Alliance this morning. The Healthy Living Alliance is a coalition of civil society organizations, and we advocate for equitable access to affordable and nutritious food for all in South Africa. And we do this by advocating for food justice in South Africa through policy changes. One of our main campaigns and policies which we advocating for is a health promotion levy, which is often called the sugar tax, and this does not give the policy justice. It has the health promotion levy has shown positive results in changing consumer behaviors, and we also know that this has led to the reformulation of sugar sweetened beverages. As we know, we now find your Coke Zeros, your Stony Zeros, because of the health promotion levy. And because of this, it can protect the health of South Africans because it can help reduce the consumption of sugar sweetened beverages among South Africans. It also increases the revenue for government to spend on projects that enhance our people's lives, which may be projects related to improving our health system or improving our education system, etc. And it also has a potential to address climate change and the threat it poses on food security and human health. However, the health promotion levy is constantly under threat through non-transparent dealings with the private sector that dilute and delegitimize and delay the increase of the HPL to 20% as recommended by the World Health Organization's guidelines. So in 2020, in February this year, an announcement was made by the Honorable Minister of Finance to increase the health promotion levy from 2.21 cents to 2.31 cents per gram of sugar for sugar sweetened beverages above the threshold of 4 grams per 100 milliliter to take effect on April 1st this year. However, this announcement the implementation of the increase was postponed to now be next year, 2023, in April, with no explanation whatsoever. So what we did as HEALA, we submitted a promotion of Access to Information Act to Treasury on the 18th of August, demanding records of evidence that informed the decision to delay this increase of the health promotion levy, and also to share meeting minutes between National Treasury, the Sugarcane Industry and Consumer Goods Council. The information officer from Treasury had promised to get the information to us by the 10th of October. However, this did not happen. They had, when they communicated to us, they told us that they had drafted a response. However, it first needed to go into legal for review, and that's the last we heard of it. And this led to us participating in a public demonstration on the 26th of October, which was last week, during the MTBPS speech, where we handed over a memorandum of our demands to a representative of the Joint Standing Committee. And I will now play the video of that day. Thank you, Chair. This is the end of my presentation.
Okay, thanks, Umuzo, for the presentation and also sparing time that was allocated to you. Then let's move to the next item, which is the interaction by committee members. Honorable members, those are the presentations from stakeholders. Over to you for clarity, seeking questions, comments. Okay, I see Dr. George. Yes. Dr. George, Honorable Ryder, Honorable Abraham, Honorable Okam, Akbare Dutoy. Dr. George.
Thank you, Chairperson, and thanks very much for the presentations today. I'll start off with SAICA. Yes, I'd also like to add my thanks to Dr. Smulders for her contribution to the committee. It's always been very valuable insights that she's brought, so I wish you all the very best in your future endeavors. I do have a question on your presentation. You mentioned grey listing, and I wanted to know whether you might have done some work on what the impact might be. I know there's been a bit of speculation on it, etc., but what I'm trying to figure out is that if there's been any significant work done on what the impact might be given it happened to other jurisdictions. And then on the public economic project, you mentioned the debt to GDP ratio. What do you expect is going to happen with the debt once the Eskom debt has been transferred over to the national balance sheet? Have you looked at that closely? You did mention it. And what you might expect the increase in interest payments might subsequently be then, and then obviously the possible crowding out then of other areas of payment, service delivery in particular. And then for COSATU, you mentioned economic and social relief. Now, we know the minister was silent on the cost of living crisis. So I'd like to know what your view is, or whether you have a view on expanding the zero VAT rated food basket. So having more food items in the zero rated basket. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Dr. George. Honorable Ryder.
Thank you very much, Chair. I know Dr. George was very brief. I'm going to use some of his time, if that's okay. First of all, to Kasatu, thank you again for the presentation. Public wage bill you mentioned, and we saw a recent comment from Kasatu that following discussions, your baseline has gone back up to 10%. Where are we now? What are the discussions, and what does it look like? You said government must resolve the issue with the impasse with the public wage bill, but we all know these things have got two sides. So won't you give us some input on that? I did enjoy the fact that you highlighted the issue that there's no real budget allocation to deal with corruption. And certainly if one looks at the adjustment to the NPA or the Justice Department, there isn't really very much going on there. Saika, yes, Dr. Smulders, you will be missed. We've always enjoyed your presentations. Thank you very much. We trust the institution will remain and continue to give the excellent submissions that have come to date. I thought that there was an excellent point made about a risk-based schedule of all guarantees that government has issued, and I'd perhaps like to emphasize that. There was also a comment about infrastructure spend and the fact that just repairing our current infrastructure is not really part of what was promised in terms of the infrastructure-led recovery. Keeping stuff going is one thing, but actually having a catalytic new infrastructure project that's going to drive the economy is something entirely different, and what was expected from the president's initial comments when he came up with the ERRP. So appreciated those inputs. Right, so then Institute for Economic Justice spoke about the commoditization of education and almost had a swipe at public, sorry, I beg your pardon, at private institutions, private schools. And I thought that that's a little bit strange. You really shouldn't be blaming the private education part of the industry for the quality gap. It should be the other way around. The public public education should be trying to raise their game up to the same level as private institutions. Certainly with the checkbook, I did appreciate the fact you raised the per capita spend. And I also appreciated the fact that there was a good, strong focus on education, which I believe is the long-term route out of poverty for most. The public economy project, I thought, thanks. It was quite a technical presentation, especially considering that we got 5 or 6 presentations yesterday afternoon. And I would have liked it if you'd spend more time unpacking it for us. I'm going to spend some more time reading that. Chair, I think I'll leave it there because, as usual, I don't have much to say on the Budget Justice Coalition. Thank you.
Thanks, Honorable Ryder. Noxie, Honorable Abraham.
Yes, Chair. Thank you so much, Chairperson. And I would like to also add my voice to those who have appreciated the inputs. And I think the interest that is shown by stakeholders is quite impressive. And I think some of them who do not normally come to the committee for presentations should be encouraged to do so even more, especially when it comes to drafting of legislation, so that at that point we can also appreciate the comments and recommendations of the public in matters of public importance. Chair, there are areas I think that are low-hanging fruit. I'm sorry that I couldn't really hear much of the video that was shown. However, I feel that the point that was being made is that the organization tried to make contact with a National Treasury, and National Treasury dropped them along the way. And I think sometimes we can prevent such actions being taken by public organizations if only we could deal with them, because it means they had an interest of opening a conversation with National Treasury, but that didn't come to fruition. And I think we need to lift that so that Treasury responds to that, because it's quite important for us as a committee that as the public reaches out, government departments also meet them halfway. Chairperson, I just want to, because at some point, really, when as a committee we are not satisfied, and that's why I appreciated your stance yesterday towards the department when they did not comply with the stipulations of the committee, that you address them in a firm way, and also not just them, but the ministry be addressed in the same way, because a time should come for us as a committee to really reject the budget, because we are mandated by even the African National Congress, which is in power right now, to vigorously oversight government departments to a point where we feel that as a committee, this is not working for the people of the country, because when for instance, in most cases, the stakeholders that have spoken here have spoken to what the president has said, which is not seen in the budget. And that is, I think, where we should stand. And I appreciate the fact that it has also been spotted that there's no emphasis as such on gender, while as a country we're facing what the president referred to as a pandemic of a gender-based violence. And I think generally the fact that we look out for education, which is the power in the hands of our future leaders, for vulnerable groups, which shows that we are a caring government. You know, I think as a committee, through this interaction, we have been empowered so that we can be more effective in doing the work that we have done. I want to appreciate especially the organizations that have also come up with recommendations, because it's all good to present our challenges with what National Treasury has presented, but it's quite another when we say this is the way that we think National Treasury should go. Thank you so much, Chairperson.
Thanks, Notse. Akbare Okam.
Good morning, Chair. Thank you for the opportunity. Chair, I'm going to be brief. I have been partially covered by Honourable George and Honourable Ryder. From my side, I would also just like to thank Dr. Smulders for presence every year and for giving us the information that she gave us over the years. You will most certainly be missed, and we wish you all of the best with you and your family and your next endeavours that you are taking on. Chairperson, one question to Kusatu. Honourable George asked them about their opinion with regards to the increase of the zero-based food basket, zero VAT-based food basket. I would also like to find out from Kusatu what the opinion is with regards to the revising of the fuel tax levy, especially with regards to, if you look at the contributions to the road accident fund, that is substantial, that forms a substantial part of the fuel levy. And the fact that there are a lot of people out there that are already paying third-party insurance to their own private insurance companies that can cover for that. We know that fuel has got a huge effect on the livelihoods of people, especially the poor people, on a daily basis. I would like to hear what Kusatu's opinion is about that, and if they support something like that. It is worrying, if you listen to Dr. Smulders, what the total debt is of South Africa. Not only government debt, but also the debt of companies like, or institutions like the Road Accident Fund, which are standing at 479 billion. We know that there's a lot of Eskom's debt that will be taken over. And I agree, I would just like to put on record that our debt is running out of control. And we need to really put measures in place to curb that. I would like to find out from SAICA what they think those measures should be and what their opinion are of better and more consequence management with regards to people working in government departments in order to curb our debt and to have the right people in place. Thank you, Chairperson. I'm covered.
Baie dankie, Agbare Okam. Agbare du Toit.
Honourable Chair, thank you for the opportunity. I want to start off with Kusatu. I disagree with your efforts in support of the district development model. I think that the fact that we've got so many amalgamated municipalities contributed to the dire state in which municipalities find themselves, and the oversight role can't be played efficiently. The decentralization is needed for effective operating of municipalities, and that's a fact. To SAICA also, to Dr. Smulders, thank you for always enlightening this committee with your presentations. We support your view on the funding of the VIP protection units, as well as law enforcement and the National Prosecuting Authority. Also support your view on the effective spending of funds. And it's obvious that cadre deployment and tenderpreneurs are not yet rooted out, and we're still sitting with that problem in municipalities and in government as a whole to a great extent. The shared concerns, as highlighted in your presentation, is always insightful. We wish you all the best in your new venture, and we will miss your wisdom and your honest approach. I want to know, what is your view on inflation and interest rates in the next 2 years? We know that SARS collected more funds than they anticipated to, but we also know that the higher living costs will have a negative effect on the people in the country. That will affect their spending trajectory. And also, up to now, the agricultural sector and the mining sector contributed to a great extent to the tax that was collected by SARS. And we know those two sectors are under tremendous strain at this stage, and it will definitely have an effect. Then to the Institute for Economic Justice, thank you for your presentation. The basic education expenditure per learner is definitely concerning, and we do not necessarily support your tax proposals and feel that businesses and individuals are already taxed to the limit. Thank you, Chair. That's all at this stage.
Thanks, Agbare du Toit. Comrade Yunus, over to you. And
thanks, Comrade Chair. Just a few quick things to Kusatu in the first instance. I think I know, but could Matthew say a bit about what he means by, what Kusatu means by strengthening the public procurement bill? On the BIG, it's raised with all the organizations appeared before us who support it. The appropriations committees on which we serve on the NCOP side, as well as the finance committee on the NCOP side, the same committee. And I think it's the same on the NA side. All have expressed support for a BIG. So I don't think there's any difference there. It's about playing our respective roles in pressurizing Treasury, bearing in mind the parlous state of the budget to actually implement it in some other incremental form. So, I wondered whether any of the agencies here, organizations here, and maybe it's unfair on them, but if they have research capacity, I know Kusatu doesn't have the capacity that it used to. I mean, do they have any ideas of how we can, excuse me, find the money, for a BIG? Well, what would we, which would be the sources of that money? So it's a question addressed to all of the organizations who do support the BIG who appear before us now. Then, has Kusatu got any views on what progressive model, as Matthew said, they've got for e-tolls? Because surely those of us who've got cars and earn the salaries we do must pay for the roads, not the working class and the poor. But then now, how would that happen? Chairperson, we must actually condemn this, really. The municipalities are not paying their workers, really. I mean, this is outrageous. The MP, I mean, the councillors are getting their salaries, but the employees are not, the workers are not. I mean, we should really take a position, Comrade Chair, on this. And support, I mean, it's a matter for appropriations, but maybe we should alert them to look at this. The post office remains for all the digitalization of the economy and the 4IR and so on, given that large swaths of our population don't access the 4IR, like those of us in the urban areas do and the middle classes do. I mean, the post office remains, I mean, one agrees, the post office remains something that we should support. Excuse me. On the public economy project, hi Rashad, I see you playing a new role. All right, you say two things, the spending ceiling is unreliable and you talk about the lack of reliability of key budget metrics, right? I picked this up also, and I'm sure others of us do in the public domain. There are other experts who point to this and so on. Could you elaborate a bit on that? On the BJC, you know, broadly, we're going to repeat what we said. You're going to get bored, but, you know, and you're quite right to be skeptical of us. Every right, actually. But the truth is, I don't know. Well, it seems to me the majority, certainly the majority party, will not agree with an austerity budget. It depends on what you mean by austerity. There's no abstract definition of it. It depends on the context, the state of the economy, the parlous state of, or the state parlous or otherwise state of the resources we have, the budgets, the capacity. So given where we are, it could be argued, although increasingly on slender grounds, that this is not an austerity budget really. Austere, yes, but is it austerity? Well, I mean, it's a debatable point. In other words, as a principle, we would not support austerity. The majority party's values, views, perspectives, whatever we do in practice at least, but that's not really where we are. So this is something we're all bound by, whatever our political inflections within the ANC. But clearly, you know, especially in the appropriation side, we need, where possible, suggestions on how we might shift funds from one program to another, from one sphere to another, from one area to another, from one department to another, or public entity in the cases of SOEs. Hila, I mean, Chairperson, I agree with what Noxie says. I don't know why Treasury doesn't reply. This is the public interest. They took a decision, then they retreated. It's their obligation, as Noxie says. They must just deliver. So in the first instance, I agree with her. They must reply on Friday or later today. Why won't they give the answer? The committee is entitled to the answer anyway. Give it to us and we will forward it in our report and in other ways to Hila. Hila has a right to the answer. Sharon, yeah, you know, Chairperson, Sharon has been around for thousands of years, as has, of course, Matthew. Now Sharon's gone, so we should urge Matthew to stay. Sharon, often, well, not often, but at least half the time we didn't agree with what you said. But that doesn't detract from the value of what you brought to our committees. I think you've been here for almost every MTBPS and budget since I entered this terrain in 2014. So we wish you well, whatever it is you're doing. I like the deadpan way you will deal with the impassive, you know, when we take your order, then you'll reply in your steadfast way. I just like the way you do it because you are more calm and complacent in your responses. And maybe a bit too sure, like we politicians often are accused of, but there you are, we will miss you. Noxie, I agree with a lot that Comrade Chair that she says, but I want to say moreover, finally, Chairperson, I can't resist saying this. We didn't see her on the screen, but what we saw was a lovely photograph of her in traditional attire, Chairperson. Now, you know, it's not only for wearing during Heritage Day. So when she appears before this committee, it's not always as wonderful as seeing the photograph of her. Thank you, Chairperson.
Thanks, Comrade Yunus. Then Mutlompe Mlezan.
Thank you, Chairperson. The previous speakers, they have covered me. I've got only one question left to COSATU. The government has pronounced itself through the MTBPS that a 3% increment will be implemented. And the unions are not happy and they are intending to embark on a strike. As the umbrella of the unions, do you have any plans in place of interventions to bring all stakeholders back to the table to prevent the looming strike? Thank you, Chairperson.
Stakeholders who want to start with the
Chairperson, sorry, I put my hand up again. May I just make one point, Chairperson?
Yeah, over to you.
Yeah, no, just that, you see on this BIG, Chairperson, we just go around and round and round. Okay, so we are very clear, we want it, and we need to do on our side, you know, the necessary lobbying and so on as we get to February. But Chairperson, it's also true that, you know, COVID has eased now. There's more scope for civil society to be active. I know they've also got their own capacity and funding and other resource constraints, but they need to, in my view, really also mobilize more around this. So many of them are committed to the BIG. I know they have these campaigns every now and then, but like every other government, and especially we're vulnerable on the eve of a 2024 election, I mean, they really need to put more pressure, mass pressure of all sorts on Treasury as well. We should do more, Chairperson. I think most of us will agree, but they also need to do more because it's only through massive pressure, public pressure, that majority parties concede. And really, you know, it's fine to come here and present a strong case, which one can agree with, moral and principle terms, but there's also need for more mass activity around it. Sorry, Chairperson. Thank you.
Thanks, Comrade Yunus. Can we get reactions from presenters?
Thank you, Honorable Chairperson. I want to respond to the chair of the other committee, Comrade Yunus Karim. He asks questions around definitions of austerity, what we meant. What we mean by that is that we associate the word austere with forbidding, rigid, stringent, ascetic, and it is a term that was introduced in response to the February 2022 budget by the AIDC itself. So I think we owe you all an explanation by what we mean by austere. In my mother tongue, I guess the word is snoop, you know, like cutting. But you can't do that. Our point is you can't do that as a political choice at the cost of Section 27 realization. I think that's the sting in the tail about what an austere budget does, and that austerity in the current context is actually inappropriate. That's our view. Honorable Chair Yunus Karim also answers our question around and raises issues about the BIG, and he says we are going around and around and around. We can go back as far as the early 2000s in the Taylor Committee report, where 4 respected South African-based economists, Peter Leroux, Charles Meth, Ingrid Woolard, and EPRI's Mike Sampson, all said that a basic income grant, way back then, 20 odd years ago, was necessary, it was affordable, and that the sources of its payment, they never agreed on it. But the point is, they said it was necessary. And so that each of the economists proposed different sourcing of tax combinations. Some said it was by small adjustments to the pay-as-you-earn tax kind. Others said corporate tax. Others said other combinations. But the big ones that they avoided was VAT, because an increase in VAT would very, very negatively affect people in LSM, say 1 to 5. It will cut into the purchasing power of them buying bread, meat, having transportation, and the persistence of apartheid special geography in South Africa. You know what that means if you live in a township and have to travel far to the center of economic activity. So that's our brief answer to Honorable Member Karim. Thank you. I will put in a link on the PMG website about financing a big. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Elroy. Comrade Matthew.
Thanks very much, Honourable Chair, and thanks to the members. Just to run through the questions quickly. I think to Dr. George, on the issue of the cost of living, it's a difficult thing because I think workers and the poor are really feeling the pinch. I think for us, and there was a commitment by the previous Parliament to review the impact of the increase in the VAT, about 4 years ago. We think there might be some space. We know zero rating is always a difficult thing. How do you enforce it, etc.? Does it hit the poor who is meant to hit? We think perhaps, Chair, that what we raised last time was that let's see if we can't expand free basic electricity and water for registered indigent households, make sure those households are indeed registered with their municipalities. Can we supply, essential goods for free, like sanitary pads at schools or universities or clinics? Provide, free school supplies. We think those targeted interventions can help the poor more. But of course, also we need to make sure that we retain the SOD grant, increase social grants in line with inflation. Let's see how can we expand the public employment programs, the presidential employment stimulus, because those can help to alleviate the impact upon the poor in a progressive way. Of course, Chair, it also means that we must restore public transport like Metro Rail, because the poor depend upon it. We need to invest in public services which help the poor. And I think, Chair, that's also why we've said that one of the most critical things we can do to help cushion the impact of inflation is to relieve the ESCOM debt burden, so it's not so dependent upon double-digit tariff hikes, is to sort the fuel price regime. Those are things government can control, and governments seem to be very shy around doing it. Honourable Ryder, we were quite disappointed that the Minister, when he spoke in the MTBS, he said, let's tackle corruption, additional allocations, but there was no actual details about what does that mean in practical terms. But what we can see in practical terms, Honourable Chair, is that the police headcount has decreased by 30,000, about 38,000 in the last decade. Our population is increasing, our crime and corruption is increasing. We all know the State Security Agency is a cesspool of corruption. We've seen no action. We see backlogs of 2 years in courts to get trials dealt with. And it's a bit unfair that we charge people, but we don't bring them to trial. Chair, if you look at the National Prosecuting Authority's targets for this year's APP, they're very far behind. They're about 15% for asset forfeiture cases until the target's met. They're 10% for asset freezes. They're 1% for asset recovery. And in terms of the backlog cases of 62,000 in terms of the target, they only have done about 4,000. We have a significant levels of vacancies in the NPA. I think, Chair, what we all want to see is that we welcome the arrest, but we want to see convictions now. We want to see people in orange overalls. Chair, just in terms of Honourable Ryder and Moletsani around the wage bill, there is a CCMA mediation process. We hope that it will be successful. Negotiations are always about compromise, but we can't afford to throw nurses and teachers and police officers under the bus. They have the right for their salaries to be taken from inflation. Governors tabled the 3% plus the 1.5% cost of living, the R1,000 gratuity. We hope government will help to meet workers halfway. Let's make sure there's a CPI increase. But we're quite worried, Chair, about the rapidly declining headcount levels. And if we continue to impose 0% or below inflation increase on public servants, if we don't fill vacancies, we are going to see the brain drain escalating. We think, Chair, that there is space to assist government. We have, and we've been raising it for years, to have a single collective bargaining process for the entire state that will help to ensure more sustainable finances, help to ensure we reduce the gaps in the public sector. We think there is space to cut what management or senior officials, politicians earn. I know Honourable Karim would always ask, so where will the money come from? We think, well, Chair, if we invest more in SARS, they can deal with the issue of tax evasion, bring additional revenue as we're already seeing. If we want to address the real fiscal cause of our crisis, it's about rebuilding local governments so basic services are provided, so we attract investment. It's about stimulating the economy. It's about addressing load shedding, addressing the crisis affecting rail, etc. That's the real way to grow the economy and to address the fiscal crisis. Chair, just to Honourable Abrams, we would agree completely. We're in a real crisis, and we don't see enough bold measures in the budget or the NTPS around corruption, around the headcount, around rebuilding public services, supporting SOEs, the fuel price, the stimulus, etc. So if we're not dealing with issues in a bold way, how do we expect things to turn around? Or we're just simply going to pray and to wing it and hope things will improve for the better. So it would be good if Parliament can also help put pressure. I think, Chair, just to Honourable Ocamp, we think there is space on the fuel price. So obviously we can do nothing as a country about the international oil price, the war in Ukraine, etc. But at a 32% tax regime, we think there is space to reduce it. And hence, I think that the current ministers of finance and DMRE and the previous minister of energy made commitments this year and 4 years ago to review the fuel price regime. But yet then we hear nothing from government afterwards. We're having our fuel price hikes today for petrol, for diesel. Chair, we think it would be helpful for Parliament to put pressure on the Department of Transport to retable the RAF and the RAPS bills, because those bills were at Parliament before. They were rejected for suspect reasons, we think. There's been a lot of lobbying by the road accident lawyers who have got a vested profiteering interest in maintaining the status quo because they make a killing out of it. And the money that's meant to go to the road accident victims doesn't go to the Times. The road accident lawyers profiteer. But of course, the lawyers play a role because the RAF is mismanaged so badly. So I think, Chair, if we can get these bills back to Parliament by SONA, it can begin to turn around the RAF and lessen its dependent upon the fuel levy hikes. Chair, just to Honourable Du Toit. So look, we're not saying per se that we're married to a district development model, but I think our point is local government is in free fall. If you look at a decade ago, 10% of municipalities were in crisis. Today is 90%. We get reports that municipalities may not last beyond December. So if we do nothing, if we continue just to turn a blind eye collectively as a country now, then we should expect in a year's time, 2 years' time, many municipalities will simply have collapsed. And the fact that we have 3 dozen municipalities time and again who don't pay workers in many provinces, Eastern Cape, Free State, Northwest, Mpumalanga, etc., it's just going to get worse. And that's why we're seeing companies closing like Clover and Lichtenberg and Frankfurt, because we're simply seeing no action by Cogta and by Salga. Just Chair, to Honourable Karim around public procurement bill, I think we do appreciate the good faith Treasury has engaged with us at NEDLIC on it. We've managed to make significant consensus. We think there is some space to further enhance it when it comes to Parliament, and we would want to see Parliament to prioritise it because it's a very important bill. We think about just tightening measures to make sure there's full access by the public to tender information, so we all know who got which tender. You have a bit of shining of a spotlight. We need to empower the Chief Procurement Officer to be able to instruct government entities on what to do, and of course to resource it adequately so it's fully empowered. We think we do need to have a provision in the regulations to disclose when politicians or the families do business with the state. There is a mechanism to monitor that as well. We think we need to empower the CPO to make sure that the government's localization commitments are binding upon all government institutions. And I think lastly on that point, Chair, is that we do need to incentivize in the bill and to reward people who blow the whistle on corruption in public procurement. And of course, as the President said, protect whistleblowers from victimization, from being assassinated, etc. Chair, just trying to move quickly. On the BIG, look, we think the SOD grant is a very positive intervention. It has done wonders for many people, but we do need to link it to the food poverty line, or at least to increase it for inflation. We think it's affordable, Chair, at 44 billion rand. Even if you increase it for the food poverty line, it'll be about 80 billion rand. We know there's a lot of money, but we think it is affordable. And perhaps the question, Chair, we should ask is that, can we afford not to have it? Can we afford to leave 12 million people with no source of income? But let's see how can we link recipients to skills programs so they can help find jobs. On the e-tolls, Chair, we think we need a more progressive funding model for it, as opposed to what we had was a regressive uniform approach. I think that's been the fundamental issue. And also to see, can we not insource some of these functions to the state as opposed to outsourcing them to private companies foreign companies who then simply want to profiteer at taxpayers' expenses. On the post office, Chair, I mean, look, in the budget, they said there's a target of retrenching 6,000 workers out of the 16,000 employees. That's going to collapse the post office. We've seen criminality taking place at the post office where the employer deducts medical and pension contributions, doesn't hand them over. But yeah, we think there is a roadmap on the post office. There is a post bank bill before Parliament, which is going to help unleash the post bank. We think that's going to give growth to the post office and to provide injection to the banking sector. It is in essence a state bank, and we think the DFI should support it and the state should support it too. There's a post office amendment bill coming to Parliament soon, which I think also is going to repivot the post office in terms of entering the courier space, becoming a multi-purpose government site. But of course, the state also needs to give support and use the post office, the post bank for its needs. Chair, just getting to the end, just on the sugar tax, I mean, we thought it was correct for Treasury to delay the increase in the HPL for 1 year. That was part of the commitment in the master plan on the sugar industry between government, labor and business. It's a 1 year postponement, and it's just to give a bit of cushioning to jobs in the sugar industry, and that was part of the original 3-year commitment to show we have a just transition for the sugar industry value chain. And then I think lastly to Honorable Moletsane, on the issue of a strike in the public sector, look, we don't want a strike. There's never a workers' port of first recall because the issue of no work, no pay is implied. Workers are struggling, but workers are also deeply frustrated that for 2 years, maybe 3 years, they have not seen an inflation-linked increase on their salaries. They're drowning in debt, and they want to see government engaging with them in good faith. But we do hope the CCMA process can yield results and government will engage in good faith. But I think lastly, Chair, is that the damage that was done to collective bargaining by the previous Minister of Finance, Honorable Mboweni, is huge. He has shattered the trust by going to Parliament and imposing a wage freeze, and then to say we're going to impose a 4-year wage freeze. It is going to take real efforts by government to rebuild that trust, and it has to do it. And we have to find a way to close the 2020 chapter if you want to take workers forward. We're not saying we mustn't be creative, we must be creative and find each other, but I think it's going to take serious efforts by government to rebuild trust with public servants after what happened in 2020. But yeah, apologies for taking too long, Chair. Thanks very much.
Mbali, Sharon, Rashad.
Thanks, Chair. I'd like to come in on 2 questions. Firstly, the question on austerity, which Roy touched on, and then the issue of the big. Just to say, we define austerity, and as I've indicated in my presentation, it's simply the reducing of public spending and or raising taxes in order to reduce public debt. And this is a key strategy that forms part of the fiscal strategy that we see in the MTPPS, and we've seen since 2012. So it's not a new thing, but it's something that has been ongoing, as some of the presenters have shown. And it has resulted in one of the ways rather to see it is to track non-interest expenditure. Over the past decade, overall non-interest expenditure has been cut. And this is why we see that when you look at the amount spent per learner has been declining from around 20,000 to 16,000 in 2021, between 2021 and 2009. And so these are some of the key ways to see that a budget is an austerity budget. And even in the MTPPS, there is an acknowledgement that there's an aim for a primary budget surplus. This is a classic example of an austerity budget, and it's usually forced on countries in economic difficulty, in which the revenue exceeds the spending. And so the difference from that is channeled to paying debt. And this is why we are seeing the revenue overrun that we've gotten has been significantly used to pay the debt. And so some of the proposals that the colleagues have already elaborated on clearly state that they should have been used to also expand social relief measures, including the SRD grant and other social priorities, especially given that there's been a rise in the cost of living. And so That's I think the best way to see that this has been an austerity budget. But usually some problematic ways of viewing this is to include debt service costs as part of government expenditure. And this, when you include debt service costs, it may show that the government expenditure has increased with CPI. But then this is not an accurate way of defining an expansionary budget. And so when you look at non-interest expenditure, which excludes the debt service costs, it's quite clear that it has been increasing below inflation and population growth, and that is austerity. And I would be keen to hear what is meant by to say that it's not an austerity budget, or we've not been seeing an austerity budget, and how that is defined. And then to go into the issue of the BIG and how we can finance it. We've raised a number of financing measures from the IJ, but also other civil society organizations have done extensive research on how we can finance it. And I think the key point there to start is that the gross cost of a UPIG is not the same as the net cost. So when you look at the net cost, that takes into account how many people would take up this grant over time, as well as some of the multiplier effects that it will have in stimulating the economy, and some of the VAT that would be recouped as people spend money into the economy. These are some of the key issues that influence the net cost of the UBIG, right? And so the stimulus effect, the VAT, and also when you use a progressive measure such as the social security tax, much of the money can be clawed back to the government. And so these are some of the ways in which we think it's important to view the cost of a UBIG. And then another question was raised on taxation, say, from one of the members to say they're not in support of increasing further taxes. But when you look at South Africa and the rate of inequality in the country, there is clearly a further scope to use progressive taxation as a lever to redistribute income to poor households. And when we say progressive taxation, we mean that this is tax that is usually imposed on the wealthier to contribute proportionately greater amounts since they have more wealth, and those who are poor. And so it will not, it's not taxation that affects everyone in a uniform manner. And some evidence from the ITUC, one of the progressive institutions that does work in this area, has shown that progressive taxation, including through corporate taxes and the wealth taxes, are one of the key measures that lead to improved growth that we need to look at looking at when we are considering how to fund a basic income guarantee. And so lastly, there's also untapped resources. When you look at, for instance, what Sherlyn mentioned in her presentations around tax rebates for high income earners, we know that the subsidies on pension fund contributions, which some people who look at this data have estimated to be about 87 billion. There's also subsidies on and return on investment on retirement fund assets, which are also estimated to be in the region of about 46 billion, right? And so when you look at some of these rebates, which amount to about 130 billion for wealthier South Africans alone, there is scope to look at what other financing mechanisms that we can look at in introducing a PIG. I think the key question here is whether there is political will from those that have the power currently, and MP Eunice is correct in saying that we need to increase the pressure in terms of mobilization. But whilst we have done that consistently, there's also a need for Treasury, and we've raised this in our submission, to open up the space for participation and for us to interrogate some of these regressive fiscal policy measures that have imposed. And this is one of those platforms that we are using to raise awareness, to say the parliament must reject this budget. And I'm encouraged by MP Knox in raising that it's time the budget is rejected. That's a bold statement and a step towards the right direction. And I think those are some of the inputs that we need to be seeing from a committee like this in supporting and in working together to ensure that we protect human dignity and human rights. Thanks.
Thanks, Zimbali. Over to you, Sharon.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. I'm going to start with Honourable George's question regarding the grey listing and what the impact was for Turkey, for instance. So there is quite a bit we haven't done our own research, so we've relied on what has been already presented in the media. And as you can see, the impact on grey listing is it affects FDI, it affects currency, it affects your inflation rate, GDP growth, it affects absolutely everything. And just to put that into actual numbers and figures for you, for instance, in Turkey, which was grey listed in 2019, they had a decrease of capital inflow of 7.6% of GDP and a decrease in foreign direct investment of 3% of GDP. Now, if we just take that 3% of GDP from a South African context, that's almost 300 billion rand, which is basically doubling what our current deficit is in the budget. So it is scary, scary numbers. And to be honest, there were two scenarios presented in the budget, a positive and kind of a worst case scenario. And I can see why that didn't include the impact of grey listing, because it is really severe. It's absolutely severe if what happened in Turkey. And it carries on. For instance, if we look at Pakistan, they lost $38 billion in GDP and $3.6 billion in foreign direct investment in 1 year. So the implications are really bad, and it's not only the financial, it also has a negative impact on the banks and access to the banks for well, in this case for Turkish people. They couldn't access the banks. The banks were more risk averse, so there were narrower access to the banking services, and that obviously inhibited further economic growth. The value of the Turkish lira also fell down significantly to new lows, and it shed 20% of its value in 2021, which was last year, and the inflation skyrocketed to 19.89%. So in summary, grey listing just adds to our barriers for foreign direct investment, and our economy, cross-border trade is going to be prohibited. It's just really difficult for South Africans to be trading, and it would be, I don't even want to think what it will do to South Africa. So we really do need to ensure, do everything possible, allocate all potential resources to prevent this from happening, because I don't think our economy can withstand this shock. Then Dr. Ryder, Honourable Ryder, asked a question in the chat about the coordinating of the parliamentary committee and how we ensure that everybody is informed of what is going on, and he suggested a chair-to-chair discussion. Yeah, look, we absolutely appreciate that it's this difficulty with knowing exactly what's going in all the committees, and we do understand the rationale for splitting the different committees and their different functions, because they do have different functions, but we do need to understand that it's a collective process, and ultimately Parliament, whichever committee, it's all the committees are collectively responsible for this, and this requires a whole holistic overview, 360 degrees oversight role. And we know by process, it's first the Standing Committee of Finance, and then it goes to SCOA and then SCOPA. So the process can kind of be aligned to that end. And we wouldn't propose how to actually do it, but I think Parliament can come up with a solution, even if it's like we do have this joint standing committees, just holding the committees together, being present, not necessarily providing input at that stage, but just hearing what is going on. And the chair-to-chair recommendation is obviously a very, very good one as well. Then we move on to Dr. Oakham, Honourable Oakham's request about consequence management and debt management. As we've said, this is a difficult one, but we've previously made submissions on consequence management in our February 2022 budget submission, and I'll resend that again. But it is in essence that the money allocations have to reflect responsible spending. And we have to ensure that there is disciplinary action if there is not responsible spending. And, you know, it's imperative that we follow. I mean, the law is actually quite clear. And to be honest, I also didn't know what the processes were, who's responsible for what. But the BFMA, MFMA, the Constitution actually quite clearly sets out who is responsible and what level. So again, I'll send that information. And we've said, you know, the disciplinary action has to happen. The accounting officers have to be held accountable. We've also suggested on a larger scale is that the government uses the New Zealand model, where there is a budget available and that money gets allocated to specific projects where there is a direct need. So you all get no increases, no department, no budget, no municipality, etc. gets an increase year on year. If you want an increase, you actually have to apply for an increase, and you need to motivate why you should be getting an increase. Otherwise, you need to work off the budget that you have. You did it in the prior year, and you know it then will be able to give government a holistic overview of what the priority needs are, or what the needs are, and prioritize those needs, or budget the budget spend according to those needs. So that is something that I think should be looked at by government. Dr. Dutoy, or Honorable Dutoy, sorry, I think you asked the question about inflation and where do we see it and the interest rates going in the next 2 years. Actually, on my way to school this morning to drop off the kids, I heard the Reserve Bank governor saying again that, you know, in the next 6 months, we definitely are going to be under heavy pressure. It's not, you know, when are the interest rates going to increase, it's how much are they going to increase by. So at least for the next 6 months, we are in for a big knock. Interest rates are going to go up, inflation is going to go up. There's no question about that. So that is definitely, and not, I mean, this is not even taking into account what happens in February 2023 when FATF does our review. And then, yeah, just to everybody, thank you very much for your kind comments. Honorable Karim, yeah, I've been around for 1,000 years, so I think that does justify my retirement. I think I wish that was so, but unfortunately it's not. But it is very touching. I do appreciate it, but I know you will be left in good hands. So thank you very much, everybody. I appreciate the time here. Appreciate you listening to what we are saying, and the cycle will of course continue in the same vein that we've been going on to make it better for every single person in South Africa. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairperson. I will take over from here. There were two questions that pertain to me. One was from Honorable Karim, and the other was also from Honorable George regarding Eskom and our scenarios. So I'll just put it on screen now. Okay. Okay. So Honorable George, regarding Eskom, in our scenario, and our scenarios, and I'll speak to Honorable Karim's question, are the most plausible in our view scenarios. So this isn't a best case or worst case scenario, this is a plausible scenario. So what we've done over here is based on what the Minister of Finance mentioned. We assumed a midpoint between 1/3 and 2/3 of Eskom's debt, and that's half the debt, 200 billion rands over the medium term. That's added to the government's or the sovereign's balance sheet, right? So that's the green bar over here is what we've estimated, along with interest costs that now are transferred to government. So government has to now pay the interest cost as well as service this debt, and this debt is added to government's debt stock. And that explains most or a significant portion of the difference between government's projections over the medium term and the public economy projects. Similarly, with regards to Honorable Karim, the two big components in our scenario going forward, in addition to Eskom's debt, are the expenditure items that haven't really taken place in the medium-term budget policy statement. That they haven't been written in, and this arises from the extension of the SRD. This arises from an extension of the presidential employment program, as well as what is likely to be a higher compensation outcomes. So in terms of the wage negotiations, that affects the expenditure side. And similarly, on the revenue side, our estimates for revenue over the medium term aren't as strong in terms of nominal growth compared with what Treasury presented in the MTBPS. And as a consequence, you see this green line that shows a larger debt to GDP ratio arising from a lower primary surplus and that only being realized in the third year of the MTF. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Rashad. And lastly, Eunice.
Chairperson, I don't have anything to say particularly. The mine was up previously, but just very quickly, the first is, before we misunderstood, we're not looking for a test. Sorry?
Before you, Chairperson, I mean the other comrade Eunice from Hila. I will come to you.
Oh, I see. Oh, sorry. You see that?
My apologies for the
gender neutral
name. Confusion.
You
got
it there,
My apologies for the confusion.
Comrade Eunice from Hila, not the
First of all, my apologies for the technical issues that I had. I only came to realize after that there was no sound to the video I played. But these, in closing, really, these are the recommendations that we have as HELA, and these are the list of demands which we handed over, which we had in our memorandum, which we've handed over to the Joint Standing Committee member who received the memorandum last week, to increase the HPL to 20% for better health and financial status in our country, for annual inflation-related increase of the HPL to be increased with every year, and because this is needed to protect the effectiveness of the health promotion levy, and public consultations to decrease the 4-gram threshold and expand the HPL to include fruit juices are needed with urgency. And lastly, for the National Treasury to respond with any correspondence with the food and beverage industry with relation to the health promotion levy. And I'd also like to thank Honorable Member Eunice Karing and Mam Phoebe Nakolo for recognizing the need for Treasury to honor and respond to our PI application. Thank you so much, Chair.
Thanks, Eunice from Hila, so that there's no confusion in calling the two of you. We are done. Comrade Eunice, over to you.
No, Chairperson, just a few quick things about maybe the committee wants to apply its mind to, so we take things forward. I don't know what the view of the majority would be, but firstly, look, the colleagues here, the friends here, the comrades here have given us, some of the perspectives on where we would be able to fund the BIG. Now, this is an appropriations matter, but I know you'll keep reminding me, Chairperson, that the two are interrelated. But since it's an allocation of money, I think we should refer these documents, and on that side, I promise you, Chair, I will raise in appropriations this issue, that we must look at these things and get our researchers to draw up something and act on it. So when you're saying people will be going round and round, Chairperson, it wasn't a critique of Elroy and them or anybody. He said, we also keep mouthing, yeah, we support this thing, Chair, but how long are we going to continue like this? We need more action on our side, but we also need more action on their side. Then secondly, we need to say this, Chairperson, as you have done also, on the SCOF side, to Sharon and whoever else, that look, on the FIC bills, I don't think Parliament could have acted more swiftly. The problem has been the tardiness on the side of National Treasury. And on the SECOA side, on the SCOF side, our side on the NCOP, we did, Sharon, say, I meant to respond earlier, that we were appalled at the tardiness of Treasury and we express our utmost disapproval. But if you look beyond the surface, the complexities within Treasury are also very understandable. Sharon, you're quite connected. I think you know some of that. Then very quickly, Chairperson, on HELA, the answer from our comrade from COSATU is exactly what I thought would be the answer. But the fact is, although the delay may be justified, Chairperson, because we have to find all the balances, including emerging African farmers and other farmers, and obviously workers losing their jobs. And on the other hand, the need to get sugar beverages down in terms of sugar content. The delay, Chairperson, is something they can explain very simply. And I don't think this PAIA thing should go to either courts and so on. We should require Treasury. Can we think about this by Friday? But we just demand of Treasury they give an answer and avoid this PAIA thing as if, you know, they must be held by their own, by their own petard, as the English would say. They're one of the most open, and we welcome it, and transparent, and gets international recognition for this amongst the top 3 in the world for information. So please, Chairperson, can we think about that? And on austerity, we were not saying, we know what austerity means. So it's not so much we don't understand the technical definition, Chairperson, but there is also a contextual meaning. In other words, you could have an economic growth, Chairperson, and then you're cutting spending and so on. Now that's really austere. On the other hand, you could get no economic growth and you could be sliding, but you're actually seeking to do the best you can. There's no answer I was offering. I was actually encouraging a debate and flexibility on all sides, Chairperson. Thanks. I know it dragged on, but it's just that, Chairperson, we keep coming to these things and we keep engaging around them, but we don't get enough movement on the side of civil society, but also on our side. And I think in our report now, we should be more activistic. Noxie put it very well, and I think that's exactly correct what she's saying. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Chairperson, Comrade Eunice, for your input. In moving forward, Treasury and SARS and other entities that report to National Treasury will be here on Friday. Alan and Kulego, is it 9 o'clock? Same platform to respond to the submissions of the stakeholders. Then our committee, then committees will be meeting next week, Tuesday, to consider and adopt the reports. Thanks very much. I see on the chart, Honorable Ryder is complaining that on her parting note, Dr. Smulder only confers honorary doctorates to 2 members, and is one of those who has been left behind. Sharon, you are in.
Sorry, I'll be all inclusive next time.
You can't leave Ryder behind. He wants that down. Thanks very much. All the best, Sharon.
Thank you very much.
Your colleague will be with us for very much, colleagues. Let's adjourn the meeting and meet again on Friday for the responses. The meeting is officially adjourned.
Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Long live the chairs. The chair with the girl's name and Joe.
Malibong, you are starting a battle which you can't finish.
Hi, Eunice.
Recording stopped.